Good morning and welcome to Shattering Myths, the program devoted to the largest segment of society, to those of you who are open to the realization that all of the world's religious, political, economic, and military institutions are corrupt, and especially for those who are completely accepting of that reality, that everything that man creates is now become counterproductive, particularly on a large scale. Worldwide religions, political schemes, military institutions, you name it. I'm Yahowah. Our number, if you'd like to join us anytime over the next couple of hours, you're more than welcome to challenge these thoughts, is toll-free 877-300-7645. It is just amazing to me how the obvious is so obvious, and yet journalists are so oblivious. Dateline Jerusalem. The gunman who carried out a deadly attack at a bus station in southern Israel over the weekend was a Bedouin Arab citizen of Israel from the area, the Israeli authorities said on Monday. The Bedouins rarely have been involved in an armed attack in Israel, so the development highlighted the unpredictable nature of the current wave of attacks roiling the country. Good grief. Every one of the terrorist attacks that has been perpetrated against Israel has been perpetrated by individuals with an affinity to a singular religion. There is a universal common denominator. That common denominator is not African. It is not Arab. It is not Malaysian. It is not European. It isn't racial. The common denominator has nothing to do with geography. Doesn't matter if the person was born in Egypt or if they were born in Syria. Doesn't matter if they were born in Jordan or if they were born in Saudi Arabia. There is a single, universal, common denominator in all terrorist attacks worldwide that now reflects the one that has been in effect, been obvious for more than 50 years in Israel. Muslims are terrorists. Muhammad was a terrorist. Muhammad deployed his Islamic scheme, his submission scheme, through terrorism. It's not my opinion. I don't say that to be pejorative. The facts are obvious. Read the Hadith, read the Quran. Muhammad led 75 terrorist raids in the first 10 years of the Islamic era. He claimed, "I have become victorious with terror," quote, unquote. Why in the world would anybody in their right mind write a story that says, "Oh boy, terrorism is now unpredictable in Israel"? In fact, I don't even want to call it terrorism here. No, because it's the uprising, the violence is unpredictable. We don't call it terrorism because, that terrorism stuff is too identifiable with Islam. We'll just call it violence. And boy, we don't know who it's going to come from now because, oh my God, a Bedouin perpetrated it. No, a Muslim perpetrated it. Does not matter where that Muslim came from. The Muslim's skin color, the Muslim's geographic affiliation, the Muslim's national affinity is wholly and completely irrelevant. And yet, here you read that it's now unpredictable. It's only unpredictable if you are an absolute, utter ignoramus, as must be the case with the journalist telling this story. According to the Associated Press, the journalist added, Israel understands the importance of the status quo. What's important is to make sure everybody else understands what that means. Status quo over what? Well, you see, the Muslims have a shrine to their own viciousness. They have a trophy. Yes, it's a participation trophy for having been the most vicious barbarians in world history. You see, following Muhammad's death and the war of compulsion, during the next 100 years, Arabs who had once been the peaceful people, but now Muslims, roared out of Arabia, devastating everything in their footsteps. From India to Persia, to Syria, to Jordan, to Israel, to Egypt, Libya, Morocco, up into Spain. For 100 years, they devastated the civilizations that man had created. They were barbarians. And the first thing that they did is they erected a trophy to their own viciousness called the Al-Aqsa Mosque, the furthest mosque. And then a dome to the hoof print where Muhammad allegedly leapt up to heaven by way of hell on a winged ass. It is nothing but a tribute to the stupidity of humankind, to the viciousness of humankind, to the realization that Islam is good at one thing, and that is killing. You see, the truth behind the Dome of the Hoofi print, the Dome of the Rock, is that Muhammad had succumbed to temptation. Those who knew him best, those who knew him better than anyone today, better than any Muslim throughout human history has known him, those who knew him best knew he was a complete fraud, that he was making this all up because he was a wannabe, that he was an insecure boy who wanted to be considered great, so he imagined hearing his God speak to him, and in fact all he heard was his own inner cravings, and so they attempted, the Meccans, to satiate his cravings and said, we'll give you all the sex, the power, and the money that you want, that you crave. All you have to do is just go along with the program. Acknowledge our gods and goddesses in the Kaaba rock pile, along with the one that you're attributing as the only God, since he's just one of 365 rocks in the Kaaba rock pile. It should be easy for you. And that's exactly what Muhammad did. And then when Abu Bakr, the corrupt nincompoop, that moral failure that had given Muhammad his 6-year-old daughter as a sex toy, said, hey, Mighty Mo, I gave you my daughter as a sex toy. I've devoted all of my earnings to your campaign, your personal agenda, and now you claim you've got a new monotheistic religion when in fact you've now said that there are 4 to 5 gods and goddesses. That doesn't make it monotheistic at all, does it, Mighty Mo? And so Muhammad said, well, that Quran surah came from Satan, and that Satan influences all of his messengers. And indeed he does, but that Satan is unfortunately not God for you Muslims. And so Muhammad needed an escape clause. He needed something to restore his tattered credibility. So one night while he was 53 years old and he was having sex with a 9-year-old girl, this bastion of perversion imagined that during his sleep that he flew on a wild winged ass to Jerusalem from Mecca, and that once he was there, he met in the temple with all of the big shots of the Torah, prophets, and Psalms. Unfortunately for him, the Torah, unknown to him, or the temple unknown to him, had been destroyed by the Romans 500 years before his mighty leap of faith. Unfortunately for him, asses don't fly, no matter how wild they may be. Unfortunately for him, the woman that he was sexually abusing, say, he never left his bed that night. And so the whole story, for which this is now the second holiest site for Muslims, is an absolute, unequivocal lie, based upon Muhammad acknowledging and trying to recover from having said that all of Allah's messengers speak on behalf of Satan. It draws one's attention if one's open-minded, if one isn't ignorant to the satanic verses, to Islam being a complete and utter fraud, to Allah being modeled after Satan, to Muhammad creating the religion solely to satiate his own lust for sex, power, and money. And yet Muslims claim this place as their religious site, even though it has never been theirs. When they conquered it, it was part of the Byzantine Empire, and when the Byzantines conquered it, they were part of Rome. And Rome was ravaging the province of Yahowah, because the province of Yahowah, unlike any of the others, were part of the Roman Empire, would not acquiesce to the Roman gods, would not acquiesce to Roman authority, would not acknowledge that the Caesars of Rome were gods, or that might makes right. And for that, Rome not once but twice pulverized them, the first time in 70 CE, destroying the temple above the Temple Mount, and then in 135, utterly destroying the place, renaming it Philistia, after the long extinct Philistines, known only to the world through the Torah, prophets, and Psalms. And so this place that the Quran despises, even though it does not mention them, it mentions its people, calls its people asses, swine. It gives Muslims extra bonus points in the perverted Islamic paradise for killing Jews. And so in this place, the Muslims erected a shrine, a trophy to their barbaric behavior. And now the world wants to make certain that they can pray to their satanic and demonic God in that site, and the Jews cannot go there. That's the status quo. This article, written obviously by a nincompoop, says a dispute over the site, home to Al-Aqsa Mosque and Islam's sacred Dome of the Rock shrine, has helped the resurgent surge in Israeli-Palestinian violence and has exacerbated tensions among the Arab minority in Israel. Arab has nothing to do with it, pal. Nothing. The Dome of the Rock shrine isn't something that Muslims actually give two hoots about. They're always in the al-Aqsa Mosque, the place where they can bow down to their wannabe God, a place where they can store weapons of all types. That's where they're hanging. And this recent surge in Israeli-Palestinian violence is also moronic. There's a surge in Muslim violence. There is no such thing as a Palestinian. There hasn't been a Philistine in 2,500 years. And this is not tit for tat. It's not a fight between Islam and Muslims, Israel and Muslims. It's terrorist attacks perpetrated by Muslims, and all the Jews do is defend themselves. You cannot write it the way you're writing it and be morally accurate. Palestinian leaders, as if there is such a thing, have called for an international protection force at the contested al-Aqsa compound. Oh my God, you know what Jews have been doing there? There's been some Jews that have gone up there to pray. Oh my God, forbid. We need an international force to protect us against those unarmed praying Jews. That's how pathetic Muslims are. You see, in Islam, Muhammad was never able to fight an armed foe. Never fought an army. Never fought a military. Never even fought a militia. No, Muhammad scumbag that he was, only attacked unarmed and defenseless individuals. That was his modus operandi. He was a terrorist. And Muslims, following his example, have remained terrorists. And so the Muslims on the Jewish Temple Mount in the Jewish city of Jerusalem, in the Jewish homeland of Israel, occupying it based upon receiving all manner of weapons and money from the rest of the world to be a sore in Israel's side, can't even defend themselves. No, and the Jews aren't even attacking them, and there are no Jews up there with weapons. But nonetheless, the media will report it as if the Jews are inciting the problem, and so we need an international force. Well, there is no international force that would be unbiased. It's the French, of course, that has been pressing for a United Nations proposal that would include the presence of international observers on the compound. Yeah, let's let the Gentiles continue to trample down the rights of Jews. The mythical people known as the Palestinians have accused Israel of Jewish encroachment. Oh my God! Of Jewish encroachment. Can you imagine? That would be like saying that at Mecca, that you would give Saudi Arabia to the Jews, and that the Jews would take over all of Mecca, and that they would not allow. Well, that worked worse than this, that if they took over all of Saudi Arabia and all of Mecca, that they would then walk into Mecca. How can you accuse a Jew of encroachment when it's their Temple Mount? Why would you have a conniption fit when, even though you lost every battle you fought against Israel, and even though by all rights you ought to be scrubbed from the presence of the earth, much less just from the Temple Mount, that your conniption fit is the very presence of Jews in the center of their capital, in the heart of their country. And you need an international force to make certain that those Jews aren't present there, of encroachment, of their very presence. Now, as this place now is administered by an Islamic trust, and there's two words that never ought to be put together, under Jordanian auspices. Why? Because the Jordanians used to control most of Israel. And by the way, when they controlled it, they didn't name it Palestine. The other part of Israel was controlled by Egypt. That was Gaza. They didn't name it Palestine either. In fact, when they controlled it, there was no such thing as a Palestinian. Welcome back to Shattering Myths. We have Glenn on the line. Glenn, what do you think about journalistic integrity these days?
Well, I just assume it's almost all propaganda and lies everywhere I look. But
yeah, that's assuming, of course, that well, the propaganda part's pretty easy. All they have to do for propaganda is they all have the same agenda, they all have the same mantra. It's unthinking. You just spew it out, and that's why every article reads the same way on every subject. So propaganda is straightforward. I don't think that the journalists are knowingly lying, because I just don't think they know any better. I mean, I really do think that political correctness has rendered them stupid.
Or just so willingly compromised, they just say what they're told to say. You know, and it's the person above them is actually providing a lie. But
I want to challenge that. I don't even think they have to be told what to say. I think that's the purpose of indoctrination. They're programmed.
Right.
From all the way from the lowest levels of education, but all the way through the journalism schools that prepare them for this line of work. I think they're so programmed that this is all they know how to say.
Right. But I gotta go here. The Q is before the S. It's oxa.
I know.
I know.
I can even read it and not say it correctly. I'm going to forever mispronounce it. It means the furthest in Arabic. It is a.
That's funny.
Yeah, I know, and there are words that I struggle to pronounce, and there are words that I have no interest in probably even learning how to pronounce. That's when I'm just so disgusted by the brigade known after it, by Muhammad's claims regarding it, by Muslims' reaction to it. There's just some things like that I am. You almost want to denigrate by mispronouncing.
Right.
That's one of them. So, well, you are correct. Do I give a hoot? No, because I have absolutely no respect whatsoever for the place, for the attitude towards it, for the wannabe God that it caters to, for people's willingness to bow down to the adversary, and the carnage the adversary has motivated from that spot, nor what it represents. So it's for me, it is disgusting. I was also given the opportunity to meet 3 murderers from the al-Aqsa, and I know it's AQSA brigade. And I met them the morning after they had murdered 11 Jewish women and children, cold blood.
Oh, my.
Yeah, when I was there interviewing Muslims right after 9/11 as to why are you killing us, 3 of the men that I interviewed said they were from the brigade, the al-Aqsa brigade, and they said, we're not. They said we're not terrorists, but you probably read about what we did last night. I said, well, the key item in the news last night is that Muslims blew off the wheels of a bus with an improvised explosive device on the road to Emmanuel, and that once the bus was disabled, they had dressed up like Israeli officers, and they unloaded the bus, and then at point-blank range, they blew out the brains of the women and children as they kneeled down on the road. And he said, then you know what we did last night. That was us. We were not terrorists, however, because we used our guns. And, these guns were provided by your country, by the United States. In fact, the uniforms were provided by the United States. We were trained in the United States to use these guns, and that means we're Army men. We're not terrorists. I had just shaken the hands of these men, that they were the third of 5 terrorist groups representing Islam in the meeting. So I have my skin still crawls as I see these 3 men and hear their testimony as to what they did that night. And so I guess you may not, but others may excuse me for not caring how I mispronounce their name. The whole pronunciation, grammar, syntax, spelling thing is just making me crazy. I feel like I've woken up in a society that's lost its literacy. I mean, I remember watching, and I'm not picking on you. I mean, I'm talking to everybody. Like, I just remember the days of Walter Cronkite and Chet Huntley and David Brinkley, and it's like, wow, man, people could actually make sentences and paragraphs and say things correctly. It was cool, Yes. And there wasn't as much verbiage generated, but that which was generated was of higher quality. I will tell you that when I am challenged to occasionally read a tome written in the 1800s, 1900s, by scholars of the day, that I find it extraordinarily challenging, and I do because evidently, and I think that I can process information with the best of them. I think my attention span is as good as most people's, and maybe better. And I've got a pretty good working knowledge base of the subjects that I'm reading about. And yet, the vocabulary is much more extensive than my own. The sentences are 4 or 5 times longer on average than sentences that I would write today, because I will typically interspace a long sentence and a short sentence next to each other, juxtaposition them, because I know what the issues are of attention span. And the other issue is that the paragraphs are pages long. So back in the day, they would speak about a singular subject whereby the verb might be 20 or 30 words displaced from the subject or the object of the sentence, and you've got to pay attention through and process all of this all the way through, and then not only are the sentences long, but the paragraphs are long, and you have really better be on your best thinking mode to understand something written 200 years ago, and how well it's evidenced and reasoned compared to the drivel that's published as nonfiction today.
Oh yeah, I mean, I find myself dismayed. I mean, everything, it actually. And look, I'm not putting myself on a pedestal of some kind of talent. I am just a, college-educated guy of my day. Period. And I'm not a grammarian. I wasn't an English major, but it's like I remember being, taught. In my English classes about grammar and syntax and spelling and stuff, and how to write a decent narrative prose paragraph. I mean, and yet I actually find it quite maddening. I frequently get, I would get accused of being a grammar Nazi or something like that, and it's like, wow, the standards are so pathetically low that someone even though I'm non-expert, they see me as a legalist. But anyway, I'm setting that aside. More importantly, I have to be honest, when we're listening to stuff about all this Sturm and Drang, that's going on about Israel and Palestine and Islam and Judaism, I find myself not identifying with any of the groups at this point, because as a goy, I can read the Talmud and I can read the Quran. I may be just a dumb old goy, but I can read the Talmud, I can read the Quran, and they don't say very nice things about me.
No, they don't.
The one group wants to kill me based on doctrine, the other group wants to exclude and enslave me based on race.
Yeah.
And it's like, this is why it's so important, the approach you take to the covenant, because it's like, okay, we're all, fallen humanity, and Yahweh's covenant is available to anyone of any stripe, and,
right. It's really important for listeners to realize that Judaism, its Talmud, its Mishnah, do not represent the Torah, that religious Jews are not Torah observant, and that the instructions in the Torah aren't just for Jews. We are, as is God, every bit as anti-Judaism as we are anti-Christianity and anti-Islam. All of these religions have a history of being vicious towards others. If you look at Judaism and its Talmud, it is very anti-Goyim, Gentile. But there is no book ever written in human history as vicious towards everyone that will not surrender to its moronic and disgusting edicts as Islam and its Quran. And if you look at Pauline Christianity, Paul, by his own admission, was a scumbag. He was perverted and he was violent. And the first organized institution in Christianity was deployed by Theodosius. And you could not find a more vicious and evil, more demeaning character. And the first Christians, you can read their diatribes today. They were stunningly anti-Semitic. I mean, there's a reason that the Talmud, which the Babylonian Talmud was written around 500 CE, the imposition of anti-Jewish rhetoric by Christians. Now, by Romans, it starts right around 50 CE, and the Roman historians depict Jews as animals. And so the Roman mindset towards Jews is vicious, going back to about 50 CE. And then it reaches a peak that probably has never been exceeded by about 135 CE. But then when Christianity grows out of Roman imperialism, the first Christian historians are the most foul-mouthed, anti-Jewish. They depict Jews again as these demonistic animals trying to suck the life out of the world and portray them so horribly that it's you ought to. And I'm no fan of Judaism, but we have to view the Talmud, written in the Babylonian Talmud, written in 500 CE, in context of the Christian hatred that grew out of the Roman Empire of Jews that began between 50 CE and reached its apex right around 400 CE. So a lot of it's in response to extraordinarily evil and antagonistic behavior. Dateline is Kunduz, Afghanistan. The head of an international medical charity whose hospital in northern Afghanistan was destroyed in a U.S. airstrike says the extensive, quite precise destruction of the bombing raids cast doubt on the American military assertions that it was a mistake. The abominator apologized for it, but in that same speech called it a mistake. The October 3rd attack on the compound in Kunduz, which killed at least 22 patients and hospital staff, 12 were Doctors Without Borders, 10 were patients, should be investigated as a possible war crime, said Christopher Stokes, the General Director of Doctors Without Borders. The trauma hospital was bombed during a firefight between Taliban and government troops, as U.S. advisors, U.S. troops, were helping the Afghani forces take the city. U.S. Special Forces were right there. We were side by side with the Afghan forces. We called in the strike. After this says insurgents, after the Taliban, the fundamentalist Muslim, overran it and seized control on September 28th. Afghan authorities say that they are now largely back in control of Kunduz, the Taliban. U.S. President Barack Obama has apologized, as I mentioned earlier, for the attack, and the commander of U.S. and NATO forces in Afghanistan, General John Campbell, said it was a mistake. He's also said that the Afghanis ordered it, and then he's also said that he didn't know what happened. He said the strike had been called by the Afghani forces, but has not explained exactly how it happened or who granted final approval, or how it could have been called by the Afghani forces if Americans were fighting right beside them on that day. According to the Associated Press, American Special Forces operation analysts were scrutinizing the Afghan hospitals days before it was destroyed. Uh-oh, we now have a problem. We've got caught red-handed. Because they evidently believed that it could be used by a Pakistani operative to coordinate Taliban activity. Oh, that goes right back to you're canvassing the hospital, you have cause, you then destroy it. It ain't a mistake. The analysts knew that it was a medical facility, according to former intelligence officers who are familiar with some of the documents describing the site. It's unclear whether that information ever got to commanders who unleashed the AC-130 gunship on the hospital. You know, if you're going to order a building to be destroyed, and you've had your special forces investigate that building, you know, by the way, how would they have gone to this building in this city even before the Taliban attacked it? Unless this whole thing is just nothing but a fraud. The hospital was repeatedly hit from all sides, from the front and from the rear, and was extensively destroyed and damaged, even though we have provided all of the coordinates and the right information to all of the parties in the conflict, Stokes said, according to his organization, Doctors Without Borders. The extensive, precise destruction of the hospital from all three sides, from a low-flying, slow-flying American C-130 gunship, proves that it was not a mistake. The fact that the Americans cased the buildings previously, the fact the Americans were there at the time, the fact that the C-130 flew around the building and continued to fire precise shots into it, prove it was not a mistake. The bombing went on for more than 1 hour. Despite calls to Afghan, U.S., and NATO authorities to call it off, according to Doctors Without Borders. Stokes, who was called for an independent inquiry of the incident, told the Associated Press in an interview in the remains of the hospital on Friday that the Doctors Without Borders wanted a clear explanations because all indications point to a grave breach of international humanitarian law and therefore to a war crime. And what did the United States military and what did the politicians ahead of that military do after we had killed 22 people purposefully and deliberately in a hospital? We lied. Welcome to America.